ahead of time. And in most cases, I think everyone on the panel will answer. There might be some questions that are more relevant to some than others, in which case we can kind of deal with that on a case-to-case basis. As I said, I've put those questions on a slide where they're viewable and on an editable Google Doc where you could potentially take shared notes or ask other questions, although I think it's going to be more efficient if you stick questions into the chat, because I think that we're more likely to be able to keep an eye on that than sort of the two screens at once. So I'm hoping that we'll have time to answer some questions that are not on my list. But if we're not able to answer particular questions in this discussion, we'll work on finding and sharing answers in another venue, whether that's Slack or the Islandora documentation or another Islandora meeting or call. And if you're currently carrying out or completing a migration to Islandora 2.0 and you'd like to share your experiences in another call or presentation or demo or something similar, please let me know and we will work on finding a good venue for that. I think that there's lots of folks working on migrations. There's lots of folks interested in hearing more about migrations. And so I think that we have room to do a lot more programming around this issue, kind of depending on what people are interested in and what the needs are. As I said, we're going to record this session and we'll be generating more documentation from it for sure. We may or may not be sharing the recording itself. So at this point, I want to go ahead and ask participants to introduce themselves. Eli, do you want to start?
Sure. My name is Eli Zoller. I'm a software engineer at Arizona State University. Yeah, I've been sort of the lead on our move to Islandora. What else did you want me to say about myself?
Name, role, institution. I think that covers it.
Okay. And I'm a committer. I guess that's like kind of important.
Kirsta, you want to go next?
Sure. So my name is Kirsta Stoppelfeld. I'm a librarian and I'm the head of the Digital Scholarship Unit at the University of Toronto, Scarborough, which is the eastmost campus of the University of Toronto in Canada. And we provide digital scholarship services on our campus, and we interact with other provincial consortiums as well as the larger system. And I guess I'm in charge of our migration to, I'm in charge of our systems, and I work with Nat, Kyle, and Irfan. So 2 developers and a systems administrator.
Great, thanks. Alan, you want to go next?
Yeah, there's some construction going on here, so I'll apologize in advance for the background noise. I'm Alan Stanley. I've been working with Islandora for about 10 years, ever since Kirsta hired me. So off and on, and I'm working mostly with Agile Humanities now. And I've actually got a bunch of different migration projects on the go. Sometimes getting information out of I7 and into another system. We have a client who opted to go with Omeka, so and then we're doing a lot of imports for a few different people. So yeah, we try and take as versatile approach as we possibly can. Anyway, yes, that's all I have to say about me for the moment.
Julia.
Hi, I am Julia Corin. I am the University Archivist at Carnegie Mellon and the project lead for our digital collections migration. I am also joined by Jonathan and Chris, who are our 2 developers, because I am not able to answer technical questions.
Oops, great. We will tap you in, Jonathan and Chris, as needed. Julie can tag team you. Okay, so the first question I had was, what factors drove your decision to migrate to Islandora 8? That might not quite apply to Alan in the same way, since he's sort of working for people who already decided, but for Kirsta and Julia and Eli, can you talk a tiny bit about why Islandora 8?
I could start if you like. So for us, the key part here, we are users of Islandora 7. We also have a lot of local Drupal knowledge and expertise. So we're a small team, but we rely heavily on our information and instructional technology team. All of the campus websites are run on Drupal. I've been configuring Drupal sites for since longer than I was a librarian. So I feel like there's a good amount of depth there, and we're impressed with the flexibility of that stack. There are just so many modules, and really there's nothing that we found that any other content management system can do that we can't do in Drupal. So the integration with Drupal is really important to us. And obviously the transparency of the community and the strength of the community are also really important. So we could go on our own and develop something Drupal only, but then we would miss out on what I think is a lot of expertise in this community. I think that when we saw the evolution of 7, you see a lot of communication between technologists and librarians and archivists. And I think that that really helped us to make best use of open standards. So just looking forward to more of that in the future.
Great, thanks.
We at Carnegie Mellon are coming from a slightly different situation. We have been in a vended system for the last probably close to a decade, and we were finding that there was an increasingly large gap between the community our vendor was developing for and what our needs for. So we decided we needed to move to something open source that we would have a little bit more control over, and ability to customize to meet our needs. And similar to Kirsta, we have Drupal knowledge in our library. Our main site is built on Drupal. We have a very small team. We did not have the expertise in Ruby or other platforms to pursue something like Hydra. So we ended up going with Islandora 8 because it seemed silly to go into 7 when it was end of life.
Great, thanks. Eli?
And what I can throw in here, as Amy's pointed out, I don't own the institutions. I just move the data. But we are in a position frequently to give guidance to people who know they need a change. And as said earlier, sometimes that's from I7, sometimes it's from Omeka, sometimes it's from someplace else. So they're asking us, where should we put our data and why? And with this one, we can say it's there's a bit of a learning curve, but it's stable, it works, there's a good community. We have not run into a problem yet that's unsolvable. And I won't say 100% of our clients have adopted it, but it's got to be over 90. So it's a solid system. We like to use it.
Thanks, Alan. Sorry, Eli, go ahead.
That's okay. Our story is kind of similar. In like 2018, 2019, we were thinking about where we were going to move next. We had a homegrown repository built on Django, which is a Python-based content management system. And we were looking to get into more of a community-based a platform. And so we did sort of a whole big evaluation of Samvera and Islandora at the time. And Islandora 8 was like very, like pretty, I mean, new then. It didn't even have an official release or anything. But like Julia and Kirsta have said, we had Drupal in our shop. So that was a win, and we had heard great things about the community.
Great. So Drupal in the mix seems to be often a really important aspect there. I wonder if folks could describe briefly what your collection consists of. We don't have to get into super duper specifics, but sort of IR versus digital collections kind of scope, and a little bit about your team for the migration, and in particular, if you worked with a vendor or outside contractor on the migration, or if you were doing this with an in-house team. Do folks want to just sort of go, or do you want me to call on you?
It's totally up to you. I can jump in, or I can be called upon. I'm happy either way.
Go ahead.
One thing I just want to expand my last question as well, just to say, and I think that the undercurrent there too is that so most of the U of T systems are vendor systems. There's a homegrown repository that's used centrally and stuff like that. But I think that the open source software is better. I just think for all the things people were talking about for flexibility. And then I think a lot of us too at post-secondary institutions, there's that desire to share and be transparent about what we're doing. And so I would also say that just when I push open source, it's for a lot of reasons that I think also align really well ideologically with the work of information professionals. So, and also I would rather have the responsibility myself, because I find, you know, we have some big vendor systems and they still go down. And then we just are waiting in queue at some big vendor. And I would rather be scrambling and trying to sort it out myself than waiting for, you know, for myself to, you know, you're 15th in line in the queue or something like that. So I just wanted to say that again about the decision to go with Islandora, but really just open source systems in general. So I think that they're a general good. As for our team, so I mentioned already, so that we have 2 developers, Nat, Kieran, and Kyle, who you'll see, especially Nat as a committer and did a lot in Islandora 8. And still does, and was very involved in the last sprint. And then we have a systems administrator, and then we do rely on our local IITFs for our server resources. We don't work with a vendor, except for in the way that we are all benefiting from vendors in the community, because there's a lot of great things that they're producing. And we're not averse to going with a vendor. We have done things like sponsored fixes in Drupal modules as well, which I think is a good solution. And then another thing that we do is we always have computer science students coming through the unit. And we've actually had some successes, especially recently, bringing them in on certain feature sets that we're looking for in the new stack. Does that answer? Oh, and then what's my collection? I always say we have not too much of very weird things. So we have like a very diverse collections. Probably only about 100,000 items, so not like enormous, but growing all the time. And we have stuff in different languages, because Scarborough is probably the most ethnically diverse area of Toronto, which is probably the most ethnically diverse city in Canada. So we have really wonderful, active and diverse community, and we're trying to reflect that in the collection. So we have especially a lot of Tamil stuff. We also have a lot of digital scholarship projects. So we work with a lot of people who are, you know, we have one project that people are writing TEI and MEI XML files for that have to be displayed in a JavaScript viewer. We have another project that's strongly driven by a very complicated ontology having to do with a mixture of archival documents, records related to people, records related to events, and trying to kind of present those to an end user. Those are also in 3 different languages, and then show them. So we have a lot of, little amounts of a lot of weird stuff.
Great. Julia?
Sure. But before I jump into answering the question, Kirsten's point about vended systems going down, the day we were scheduled to launch our Islandora 8 platform in December, the Java exploit took our vended system out, which we had been planning to run concurrently, and weren't able to get that back up in any form until January. So just had a very concrete example of how that can go wrong. But in terms of our collections, we have a slightly unique collection set, not totally unique collection set. We have been digitizing for over 25 years. So we have a lot of legacy collections, and we have digitized archival collections in bulk. So when I say in bulk, I'm talking about like a 279 box archival collection digitized soup to nuts. So we have a lot of unique structural metadata that has, you know, tries to represent how documents relate to one another. So that has been kind of a use case that is unique to us, and is one of the reasons we kind of wanted to have a little bit more control over how we were presenting our items. We also have a lot of standard kind of repository content, you know, newspapers, yearbooks, publications. We are adding photos, which we weren't able to do effectively in our last platform, and are working to bring video and oral histories online over the course of the next year, which we also weren't able to host in our former platform effectively. Our core migration team has consisted of myself as the university archivist, our 2 lead developers, Chris, who's our lead developer, and Jonathan, who is our Drupal Pro. Matt Lincoln, who is leaving our team, sadly, has helped us with our kind of data model and our metadata structure. We also had our metadata librarian and our digital collections project specialist in our core team. We have also had some other folks in the library who've come in and pinch hit for us, including our library's designer who does, who's primarily a print designer, but does our web stuff as well. And we did contract with a front end developer to help with our Drupal theming, as Jonathan is primarily a back end guy. Were there other questions in this one?
No, I think you covered it. Thanks. Eli, you want to bat this one?
Yeah, so collection wise, we had our legacy system was one giant bucket of a whole bunch of things. And during our migration process, we actually decided to split it up. So we have what we call Keep, which is like our institutional repository, scholarly works kind of bucket. And then we have Prism, which is more of our archival digital collections kind of bucket. So we have a wide, variety of content, but sort of we've split them into two sites. And we did not work with a vendor or outside contractor for the migration. For a period of about 2 years, we had 2 full-time developers, myself and some, I'm sure some of you know Willow. She's a committer as well. And she works at Born Digital now. And then we had like a metadata librarian that gave us, a lot of expertise and advice in terms of like the metadata strategy we were going to take. And then we also have our digital preservation officer, and she's also our acting repository manager. And that's kind of it for the team. We have a lot of other like stakeholders and other folks that are involved, but that's kind of like the core team that that actually did any work. Like work on the migration part of it. And we have about 200,000 like original files in our system. Yeah, I think that's it.
Great. Thank you all. I want to ask a little bit about the architecture or deployment that you're using for the system. So talking about whether you're using cloud or local servers. Kirsten maybe already mentioned that a tiny bit. If you're using Isle or Ansible, or if there's something else going on that I don't know about so much, just to sort of give folks, again, a little information about what this sort of looks like underlying. Maybe folks just chime in.
I'm going to defer to my developers on this.
Yeah, I can tell you at Carnegie Mellon, we have, we're using Isle for the deployment, and we have a campus-wide VMware system that we use. We used to have our own VMware system in the libraries, but then, there became a campus-wide service that they provide for us. So we use that for all our hosting now. And it's a lot cheaper than using Amazon, and it's more flexible, and they give us a lot of features that we need. So that's worked out real well for us.
Nat, are you there? Oh, sorry. Did I just cut you off, Alan? I'm the
No, go ahead.
hardest. Sorry.
No.
Matt, can you explain how we're going to do deployment? So we're just starting this. We've done a whole bunch of work to plan, but we haven't actually started our migration.
So
Are you there?
at this point, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, you sound good.
Yeah. So at this point, we have existing Drupal installations. So that are running against virtual machines, right? So it's probably going to be at least for the start, it's going to be a manual installation for some of our standard stacks, such as Solar and Solar, Image Server, and so forth. But we are looking to maybe using Docker images for those components. With respect to the Drupal, it's mostly going to be Composer managed, right? So Composer managed installations. So it's sort of a hybrid approach at this point. We used to heavily use Playbook, and we were hoping to use the Playbook for installations. It's just the heterogeneous nature of the stack right now. It's a little bit difficult to update using Ansible at this point. So it's a hybrid approach at this point.
Great, thank you. I guess Eli, we haven't heard from you, and then Alan, if you want to talk, or Alan, if you want to talk a little bit about sort of the range of things that you're working on.
Yeah, it's in terms of hardware, we're mostly using IL installations. They're stable, they work, they update. Really good example of sort of how flexible the whole system is. As a system I'm working on that wants LDAP. LDAP's not built into the container. Nigel had a PR, might have been 15 minutes later to fix that problem. So it's a solid system and it works. But yeah, our general, unless there's a reason to do otherwise, we go with IL on either in the cloud or in somebody else's hardware. It makes absolutely no difference. And Workbench to populate. The one thing we do that's a little bit different is that Workbench was designed to be run from your laptop. I get way better results if I install Workbench on the host server. Just better lag times. If I'm moving a great big file, I don't need to move it from California to PEI and then from PEI back to California when they're sitting on the same server to begin with. So if I run it locally, it's just that much faster.
Great, thanks. And Eli?
We use Ansible for our deployment. We chose that strategy a long time ago before IL8 was a thing, and it hasn't been in our capabilities at this point to switch, although maybe that will happen in the future to IL setups. But yeah, so we use Ansible, and we are a fully cloud deployment using primarily AWS, and also we have a tertiary backup in Wasabi, another cloud provider. But yeah, we use a variety of services in AWS, your standard kind of EC2, S3, but we're also using RDS to host our database and CloudFront and all kinds of fun stuff.
Great, thanks. Okay, so the next question is a little bit more process oriented. Well, very specifically, I wondered if folks could talk a little bit about what the process was for scoping your requirements for your new system. So I feel like this is something that people who are embarking on a migration sometimes really want to know more about, is like, how did you actually figure out exactly what it is that you need, especially in a system that's new? And now there are more models out there, but especially when you were sort of starting, there maybe weren't other sites up yet that you could even look to sort of see. So if you could talk a little bit about kind of the process of scoping those requirements and figuring out what you needed and how you were going to get it.
Nat led us through a functional requirements exercise. So we went through, we had a big spreadsheet. We wrote down everything that we felt we had currently that we knew that we wanted to preserve, as well as some things that we knew that were emerging. And then we audited the system and development that we needed against that list. And it was as simple as that. It was a series of, I don't know, a half dozen meetings and some research. And then that's kind of our guiding star.
We certainly could have done a lot better at this at Carnegie Mellon. I think, hindsight is always 20/20. We did work very similar to what Kirsta's talking about. I think to a certain extent, we sort of, by process of elimination, knew that it was going to be Islandora 8 one way or another, and we were going to figure out a way to make it work. But yeah, we looked at what our old system was. We looked at, we did some user interviews to see if we were missing anything. We tried to gather feedback that we had received on the old system, the user complaints for that. And of course, that's whack-a-mole. As soon as you knock one down, two more pop up. But
I too know the joy of trying to please everybody.
Yeah.
feedback forms are fun.
Our general process is to get a list from the client of everything that they might need and let them know if we can do it or not. And sometimes it involves custom coding. A huge percentage of the time, there's a module out there already that either works perfectly or just needs a little bit of tweaking. So in terms of scoping out physical requirements, just in terms of practicality, we've adopted a practice of we won't give a time. All our timelines are based on from the minute we get server access, because we've missed timelines before where it took us 3 months to get into the server because the only person who knew how to sign up an account was away in sabbatical and this kind of nonsense. So I said, this is once we have access to the server, this is how long it's going to take. And in terms of size of resource, the kind of back of envelope rule that I go with, which is amazingly accurate, is take the entire size of all the digital assets to be ingested and multiply it by 1.5, and you're pretty close. That allows for derivatives and theming and overhead and whatnot. And that often has to be tweaked a little bit, but it's again, I find that if dealing with clients, if you're just honest about it, if you say, if you want a guaranteed answer, I can swear to a stack of Bibles that we are not going to go over the limit. The only way we can do that is by promising a system that's probably 3 times bigger than what you need. We think this will do it, but no, we can't guarantee it. If you want something guaranteed, it's going to be more expensive.
Is there anything else, Eli?
We sort of went through a similar process to what Kirsten and Julia said. We did a whole use case gathering process where we solicited feedback from everyone in the library and from stakeholders external to the library that we had worked with in the past. And then we did what was called a Moscow rating, which is where you break your things down into must have, should have, could have, and won't have this time. And then we said, okay, all of our must-haves, which of course there was the most number of must-haves because, everybody wants their thing. We said our must-haves will be our MVP, our minimum viable product, what we need to actually go live. And that's what we went forward with for our launch. We ended up taking a few things off that must-have list, but that was our general scope.
Thank you all. I will just also add, in our process of putting together functional requirements, we tried to be as thorough as we could about here's what we expect, here's what we want, but we discovered later we had some blind spots, things that we were using in Islandora 7, which is what we were coming from, which were so sort of intuitively just there as part of the interface to us that it didn't occur to us that those were functional requirements. So I think it's really important to sort of think through what their specific use cases are for various things and really kind of try to, you'll always have something you missed, but try and thinking through what those blind spots might be ahead of time can save you some hand wringing later when you're like, oh, we really wanted that. That's not there. This might be the question in terms of the nuts and bolts of migration is the question about how you're extracting or transforming data from your legacy system, whether that's Islandora 7 or something else, and getting it ready to go into your new Islandora site, how you're importing it into the new site. And then if there's anything about that process that was really surprising or you'd want to sort of flag for others as especially troublesome or especially interesting or especially important to just be aware of as you're undergoing this ingest.
Well, I can talk about us. So we have we find that the easiest way to get metadata out of the system is usually using Islandora Solar Views. So you can make really big solar views if you need to. And so that's you just take all the indexed fields and then we map them back out. It turns out we have most of our metadata managed in spreadsheets because of the multi-importer tool, Diego's wonderful tool that we use for managing metadata. So we usually have a fairly up-to-date copy of everything that's in the system. And we typically don't do direct cataloging in the system. We manage everything through batch processes. So that's obviously made things a little bit easier. We also have bags of all of our content at the object level, which are basically just this is where I asked Nat to rejoin because I'm like, I'm going to get this wrong. But we just took the Atom zip and then we have it in other pieces. So we can take this export from Fedora 3 and then we use Jupyter Hub. So we have a series of, that's set up on sort of a staging server. And that means that Nat and the other talented people can write scripts that take that content and basically break it apart and transform it into what we need. And so in some cases where we've added custom data streams, we're going to have to tweak that a little bit, but we already have a proof of concept for our books, for example. So we're feeling fairly confident that this is going to be the approach. So it's going to be export to a server, use Python, make it into the shape we want, and then workbench it into the new system. And it's going to be one by one as we go. And that's the high level. Nat, would you say that I should add anything more sophisticated to that description of how we're planning to migrate?
Oh, that sounds correct to me.
And then it's just a schlep it from one place to the other.
We are not migrating from Islandora 7, so we our old system, we were very easily able to just export a whole slew of CSVs for each of those collections, which we then went and did, OpenRefine and Google Sheets to do a lot of long overdue cleaning and parsing. And then Matt is not here. He was the one who then had to do the kind of restructuring of all of those sheets into something more ingestible for our migration scripts. I don't know if Jonathan or Chris have anything else that they want to chime in about the ingest process.
Well, as far as I think the next question is about the ingest. This one is just about the getting the things out and cleaning it, but I think you covered everything accurately there.
Yeah,
We can really talk about export and ingest as part of the all one thing now. So if there's something else to add about that, that's great.
Something I can throw into the mix is I discovered partway along the way that that Python has some excellent CSV libraries. They're really good. So my normal process now is to take the input CSV, wherever that comes from, open it up in a Python reader, transmogrify it and blast it out in a Python writer. And then I've got something that I can load into Google Sheets and run Workbench from there. It means I can keep archival copies of everything I've moved. I can see what condition the spreadsheet's in. So it's an extremely powerful combination. The other thing that we often overlook is that Drupal views creates instant spreadsheets with whatever you want in CSV. So it takes me about a minute and a half to write a view that'll save me hours of work. And I guess the other thing I would mention is I've been doing a fair bit of work on the Workbench i7 export module. We had a funny problem I was helping somebody through is they got they put their sample query in, they got the results back, and they said it was 38K long. I said, well, that seems reasonable. Let's see what we can do with it. Turns out it was 38K of headers, no data at all. So when you try to pass that off to Solr in the URL, it says, nah, I won't be doing that. So it was crashing the system. So we've come up with another system that I kind of like better for a couple of reasons that I'll get into. But it's instead of Workbench generating the query for you to suck everything out. You have to figure out what query you want first by going into the UI, experimenting until you get where you want to be. And the advantage of that is once you've taken it that far, then you can do it content type by content type. You can do it collection by collection. You can do it namespace by namespace. You can filter that out however you like. So with that produces the spreadsheet. What I like to do is then take the spreadsheet and haul it into Google Sheets, and you can clean it up there, and you can rename headers there, and you can get rid of files or columns that you don't need. You can put in an ID field if you want. You've just got total flexibility. And again, because you can save all these spreadsheets for free, you can make a paper trail for yourself, either in case somebody wants to know what's going on, or if you have to redo it. I'm redoing it in Ingest right now, and you can't exactly remember what you did last time. But CSVs and Python, man, it's powerful.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, this is what one of the benefits of Fedora, right, was that we had these nice packages. Foxmol is METS, which is a packaging format. So like those of us that are migrating, we picked Fedora for a reason. And one of the reasons is that it's going to be reasonably straightforward to get your data out. I mean, reasonably straightforward being a very relative term depending on what you're doing. But I think that it's not too bad to get stuff out of Islandora 7. That's what we found. It's not too bad. I mean, I did a content DM migration. It was a lot trickier.
Yep.
Sorry, Alan, I cut you off.
Do you remember way back when you came into my office at the library? This is at least 12 years ago. And wondering how we were going to get non-flat data into a flat system. And this is, I think, still one of the big unsolved problems with us. Is we can convert mods into fields really easily. But what we can't do effectively is take nested nodes. So if you've got 3 different address fields, we can absolutely get 3 different phone numbers, and we can get 3 different street addresses and 3 different street cities. We just don't know how to combine those yet. So I think the next big push with Workbench is going to be to start building paragraphs, and it's going to be a little tricky.
I'm not sure what will happen with paragraphs. Like, we've been looking at it. I'm not sure how necessary it is. As for nested or hierarchical systems, like for me, it's like it can go into a flat system. I can export any kind of XML that I want. I can template out any XML that I want, OAI PMH or any different types of view things. So it doesn't really matter to me if it exists in the system canonically as a nested thing, because in the end, I'm not like, Drupal's not my preservation system. Drupal is my system by which I serialize my preservation formats. So maybe I misunderstand what you're saying, but for me, I feel like I'm not too concerned about that.
No, well, as I say, address is the easy example. You've got something with 3 complete addresses in it. How do you model those? So you can attach an entity of some kind, but Workbench is not. So it could be, you could have an entire content type called address, and then just attach as many of those objects as you like. The paragraph is a little bit lighter weight than that, but you have to have some way on the fly doing an ingest of saying, for this particular object that I'm creating, there's 3 address objects that I also need to create at the time. And that's possible with this ugly conglomeration of types and commas and nested fields, and it's, but it's not very readable, and it's not one that I've come up with a solution yet. Fortunately, it's not been a problem. It's that we thought it would be. I thought those things would be all over the place. They're really not.
Yeah, maybe we could talk about that sometime, because I know we have like a metadata only site, which is like a knowledge base of digital tools, where we had to create the nodes and interrelate them at the same time, which isn't quite the same thing, but I think is somewhat similar. So it might be something worth talking about on the Workbench channel.
Where the ingest stuff is starting to intersect a lot with data modeling or metadata modeling, I think is probably another conversation, and probably a fruitful one. Eli, did you want to say something about you're getting data in and out, or out and in?
Well, actually, what I have to say actually kind of dovetails with what they were saying. So our legacy system, not Islandora 7, but we used a similar approach. Since it's a Python-based system, we used Django console to extract our data into CSVs. We used Python to transform those CSVs into something more readable. Where we diverged from what a lot of you folks are saying is we did not use Workbench. We used Drupal's migrate functionality. And the reason that we chose to do that is because we did have complex data structures. We were using paragraphs. We chose to go that route for some of our fields. And, way back when we started migrating, in 2020, Workbench wasn't there yet. I mean, obviously it's not quite there yet, but it seems like people are more headed in that direction. So we decided to go with paragraphs. We had to write like some custom plugins for the migrate modules in order to like create paragraphs on the fly and things like that. But that's what we did. So like, it's totally possible, but it's like, we have like a typed identifier field that uses a paragraph. And so, and we do have CSVs that do fun things with like pipes and multiple values and stuff like that. And our plugin, the migrate steps sort of process and break down all of those different, repeated things and know how to generate paragraphs. And way back when Seth gave me a plugin for creating typed the agents, the linked agents in a migrate, and we've been using that forever. So similar kind of thing, but we just went the migrate route instead of Workbench, and it's worked great for us.
Thanks. It's nice to have a couple of models out there that people can look to and figure out what's gonna work best for their collections and their data. The last sort of set of questions that I was going to bring to you before we sort of open the floor for further discussion and other questions is about testing or quality control over the course of a migration, and what issues you recommend checking at what stage to help your migration go smoothly, or to identify problems early on if they're sort of smaller test collections and then other sorts of scaling up. What things you sort of saw most as being most helpful in terms of testing or quality control, or things that you wish you had done differently along those lines?
I can't speak to this one because we haven't gotten that far yet. So check me out in 4 months and I'll start telling you all the mistakes we made.
Okay. Eli, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, we did a lot of, we did like local testing in our development environments for small collections really early on. Then we did more like slightly larger collections and staging. And then once we actually started putting things into our production environment, we did a lot of like manual spot checking, and by we, I mostly mean me. But then we just in terms of like the quantity of data, it was more than I could look at and say like, yeah, everything came over correctly. So what we actually did was we hired a person who had been an intern with the library for us and was graduating. So we hired them on to be our QA QC person for a year to basically go through everything that we migrated and let me know where there was a problem or if data was missing. So they would compare the legacy system with the new system, and it resulted in us, remigrating or fixing things or whatever. And it also revealed a lot of other like larger issues around like the quality of the metadata. Obviously, that wasn't something I could fix in the migration, but yeah.
Great, thanks. That's an amazing to be able to have someone do QC for you just to look at everything. That's really great. Julia, did you want to talk?
Yeah, at Carnegie Mellon, we also have too much stuff to kind of look at everything by hand. We have a 100,000 objects and change in our system right now, and our largest collection is still in our migration queue. We built a nice little validation script for our metadata that would check our EDTF dates, required fields, et cetera, to make sure all of that was conforming, or at least close to conforming, before we went through and did any transformations or tried to ingest that. And that was hugely helpful, because there's, we did a lot of metadata transformation, date transformation as part of our migration. As I mentioned earlier, we've been migrating some of these collections for 25 plus years. They're, some of them are on their 4th or 5th system migration. So there's a lot of technical debt and noise that has developed over time. So for example, Chris has had to do a lot of checking to make sure that, we had been serving PDFs in our old system. We went back to trying to use our master files in this system. So we had to do a lot of checking to make sure the number of pages in our PDFs corresponded to the number of TIFFs we had for that document, and discovered a disturbing number of mismatches there that we're still trying to go back and triage. So a lot of our QC, we tried to do programmatically prior to its ingest into Islandora, because we knew we weren't going to be able to go in and hand check. Although obviously, if I could go back and do it again, we would have had more time to do testing in Islandora after we did the bulk of our migration before we launched. But we had a very hard deadline that we were going to meet whether we were ready or not. So ready or not, we launched in December.
And Alan, you've seen a number of different systems or institutions sort of takes on this. What do you think is particularly effective?
Sort of the one thing that's absolutely essential to this is you need somebody familiar with the data to check it out. Just because it looks good to a programmer doesn't mean it's okay. So it's really handy to have somebody who's a subject expert, who's aware of what the current collection does, what they expect it to do, if there's going to be deficiencies, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. We've got some unusual errors. It's normally a transcription error that somebody's made before it gets to me. But I'm sure there's stuff that comes across my desk that whoever wrote it. So, well, of course you knew that was wrong. How could that possibly be right? And I'm completely ignorant of the data itself. But yeah, as long as you do lots of spot checks, you can do basic sanity checks. Something I learned the hard way is always check and see how much disk space you've got before you do a major installation. Otherwise, you're going to crash the whole system again. So it's as far as quality control goes, just make sure that somebody is able to determine if you've done it correctly or not. And there's always somebody. But bring them into the loop earlier rather than later.
I would say based on our experience, I tended to be the one who's checking things, and to the extent that you can check things as they're going in and not wait until all your collections are in. I mean, the more you can check as you go, the better, because the sooner you find something that's wrong, the sooner you can try to make sure that whatever that mistake is, you can tweak in things you're going to ingest later, before, as I guess Julia said, like anything you can do before you actually ingest it, it's easier to fix it before it's in there than trying to fix it once it's in almost every case. Yeah. So that I feel like finishes up sort of the pre-planned questions that we'd had. And I see that there's a question from Dawn about in the chat about writing custom search API processors for adding solar fields. This is the point where open session in terms of like questions about migrations, questions about both the process and the requirements, I guess. So maybe it makes sense to start with the question we just got from Dawn. If anyone knows stuff about that, and if anyone who's in the room but not on the panel knows answers to questions that are coming up, please also chime in, because part of this is, really want to thank again, everyone who's on the panel for sharing their knowledge, but yeah, part of this is really getting a chance to share everyone's knowledge too, so.
Yeah, Don, we've done some custom search API processors. Like an example I can think of is like we use a paragraph for title because we wanted to separate out the non-sort from the main part of the title from the subtitle. And then all that has to be repeatable for multiple titles. So we use a paragraph entity for that, but we wanted to Solr index the main part of the title combined with the subtitle without the non-sort as a separate value so that you could sort without the non-sort. Anyway, that's like a long explanation. So we wrote like a custom search API processor to be able to index on that thing, which is actually a combination of fields within paragraphs. Yeah. And all of our code is open, so I could link you to that if that's of interest.
Yeah, definitely. Does it create a new field in the Solr document from multiple like subfields within a paragraphs or?
Yeah, like you, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, the more I dig into Solr processors, the more I'm finding them to be quite useful for bringing in potential garbage and processing it into something really useful into Solr. Back when I was at UT, we had a lot of garbage data inside of Solr that we really wanted for complex queries that we could have done if the data was structured a little bit differently. So yeah, anyways, thank you.
And then Rebel had a question in the chat about if anyone was using Bagot or if anyone decided not to use Bagot.
Mark wrote a thing, Island or a Bagger, I think it's called. Is that, I think that would be the closest thing to what you're looking for. Let me send you the link. We have that like installed and wired in, but we haven't figured out the best way to like leverage it. You know, we can't just say like, we couldn't figure out like what the best model was to bag things. Do we bag things at the like the repository item level? Do we bag things at the collection level? Do we bag things at the file level? Like which level to bag it at? And then how to make that process like repeatable or scalable across the entire thing? Yeah, like if you go collection by collection, but then like, how do I like run a cron job that's gonna pick off collection by collection? But what if like one collection takes a month to bag? I mean, that's an over exaggeration, but like, you know, we haven't figured out sort of like how to operationalize that, I think is a good way to put it.
Anything else as questions? I will also mention our migration was part of a grant with Lyrasis, and as part of the grant, things have been a little delayed. So Lyrasis will be releasing like a toolkit and are planning a conference or a workshop, I guess more of a workshop on migration using Fedora. So if you're not planning on using Fedora, the Lyrasis one might be slightly less useful, but some of the things that we've put together for our migration are going to be released as part of that toolkit. And I'm expecting that to come out, well, at this point, probably in February. So I'll make sure, I mean, Lyrasis will make sure that that's on the Islandora announcements. But yeah, that there should be some more sort of actual like artifacts of stuff that we did to prep our metadata and to, you know, some of our checklists for some of our QC that, and some of our lists of what our functional requirements were that will be made more broadly available. I mean, I can also share some things on an individual level, but that'll be coming out. And as Eli mentioned, I mean, that a lot of his stuff is on GitHub. I think that a lot of people, I know Alan also has a bunch of stuff up on GitHub. I think people in general share things more often than not. So just asking for where that lives might be a really good resource as well.
One other thing I thought of that might be interesting to other people is that on a couple of our collections, we did what we would call programmatic Library of Congress reconciliation, where one of our developers basically like wrote some tooling to try to match names and subjects to LC authorities and get those URIs, right? Like that's we didn't have that kind of data in our legacy system. And that's kind of one of the great things about, you know, RDF and linked data is using URIs. So we did do that on a couple of our collections. But obviously it's not a process that can be totally, you know, automated because there are 700 John Smiths or something, you know what I mean? But we did attempt to do some of that work programmatically. Not sure if other people have done a lot of that work or if they already were blessed with that kind of data prior to moving.
Any other last remarks or sorry, go ahead, Kirsta. I was just going to say any other last sort of things you want to bring up before we're done from the panel.
I was going to talk about the URI thing. So what we've done. So we have all our vocabularies, all of our controlled vocabularies in a series of spreadsheets, and we have students looking up likely URIs. The other thing that we have going on is, you know, I think it's Alex that built that great like lookup service. So you can go out. So there's the LC, but we're actually, we make heavy use of the art and architecture thesaurus. So we're in the process of like understanding how to make those plugins. So that hopefully what'll happen is that going forward, we'll be able to, I'm hoping, do something where we go and we look them all up and add them in to the taxonomy fields for the term, and then it'll be like done. But I just wanted to chip in there because I agree with you, like that's great data to have. Yeah, names are difficult. I mean, there's a lot of existing vocabularies, but in the end, that always becomes the problem, right? Like, to which do you want to conform? And then even like, we like the idea of having a local controlled copy, but then we link out to, I mean, we're thinking about using Wikidata for some of it, like using the QIDs from Wikidata, because that seems like it's a lot better. It's it's an easier platform for going and appending other pieces to it. And this is part of that whole thing where all of us, I think, are trying to reckon with the colonial legacy of a lot of our metadata. And as we're decolonizing, so-called, I mean, what are we really doing? But as we're trying to make our descriptions more equal and more responsible, and we're seeing problems with things like Library of Congress, how are we going to account for that? And so that's kind of like partly an Islandora problem, but definitely a problem in the field. I think that Islandora can help us come up with smarter answers, more sophisticated answers too.
I think, yes, we're at time and Alan has to go. So again, thank you so much to Kirsta, to Julia, to Alan, to Eli for taking some time and talking about some, by no means exhaustively, about their migrations. I really appreciate it. And Thanks to everyone who's been here for this session. We're transitioning into the open Q&A, and so that can include migration-related questions, and those who can stick around from this panel and help answer them is great. As I said, just make sure that those questions get, if those questions are raised on this call or in the Google Doc that I shared earlier, I will make sure that they do not die on the vine, right? That we help put them somewhere where we can find some answers for them, or find another venue for that. So again, thank you so much to the panel. Thank you so much to everyone who's here. We're going to I'll unpin you all now, panelists, and we'll transition to the Q&A.
Julia, what a site you and your team made. Holy moly. Thank you for coming too. That's everyone's really excited to see that site.
Oh, thank you. It means a lot to hear that.
Yeah, no, everyone's really I think I've had 3 people send me the link, and I already had seen it in Slack. Like, everyone's really stoked. So thank you for coming and making something so beautiful and showing it off. So
great. We're happy to share whatever we can to help other folks out.
Right on. Well, I look forward to seeing you guys around then. I'll see everybody on Slack and in the forums. And thank you, Amy, for being the moderator and putting this together. I know it wasn't easy. You had to do it over the holiday break.
Oh no, it all worked out. So I'm just really, really grateful to everyone who participated and who, replied, even the ones who replied. I was like, I'm so sorry, I can't do it. I'm really grateful for, people considering. So I do have a question for Julia or your team with respect to the site. In particular, we've had a little bit of buzz. There's buzz about Mirador, and in particular the HOCR. And so I would love to know if you had to do anything. Does that come ready to run with HOCR? Are there things you had to do to get that HOCR ready? I'm going
to throw that to Chris, because he's done a lot of work. And I will say, the one thing I know we ran into is we needed to know the DPI that every document was scanned in. And if you go on our site, you can see there's a couple places where we misguessed that we need to go back and redo that. But Chris?
Yeah, I can explain that a little bit. Yeah, we wanted to use the Islandora, but we weren't real happy with the paged model, because we have a lot of fine and rare books, and we wanted to put in and let you flip through them and also see the high quality images. So yeah, we've decided to put Mirador in because the Mirador looked really cool. This was before the IIIF stuff was officially in the Islandora. So we had to make a custom model for that. Custom module, I mean, for the IIIF Mirador viewer. And let's see, it's not using HOCR, it's using annotations. It's using an annotation server so that you can do the searching inside of the book also. And that was the way we connected it. So you're really doing 2 searches. You're doing the search in Islandora. Then when you go to the item, it does a search inside the IIIF ecosystem. The Mirador sends the search in to a IIIF annotation server that we modified a little bit. It's a standard, it's called Simple Annotation Server. It's written by Glenn Robson, I think it is, from the IIIF group. And we just had to tweak that a little bit. But that way, you can search for anything inside, once you're already inside the book and it's inside IIIF. You can use different IIIF viewers also. You can use the Universal Viewer or any other viewer to view our items. The hard part was, yeah, like Julia mentioned, we generated all the hit highlighting from the PDFs, but then you're viewing the actual images and it's using the location information from the PDFs. And sometimes we have like the wrong version of the images. It's a different DPI, so the locations are a little bit off, or we had to guess on some of the DPIs because that information got lost in translation somewhere. So yeah, there's still some cleanup to do about that.
So Chris, is it right to say we did sort of a slightly hacky thing to use our existing PDFs for their OCR, but serving our TIFFs as the
it wouldn't be hacky if, yeah, we actually had the images that were used to make the PDFs, but in some cases that they're not matched up exactly. I think, things are rescanned at certain times and the DPI information doesn't match. So yeah, phase 2 is cleaning that up.
I would love to see a write-up of how you guys pulled that together. I think that would be wonderful if you guys could share that.
Yeah, sure.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, oh, I need the Code for Lib article with the play-by-play for that.
We can work on that.
That would be so great. If you want editors or someone to just like, I'll interview and write it up, then you just message me. That would be an amazing piece of documentation.
Sure.
Or potentially if you want someone to test, like applying it onto another system, I bet you could find a lot of takers, possibly including us. So
Yes, we would be happy to test that because this is something that we've been wondering about how to do ourselves. And we do have PDFs and we have our TIFFs, and we would love to be able to plug those together into the viewer if that's how you did it.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, sure. We'd be happy to share. We're a library. That's what we do. Share information.
Okay, I'm out. I'll see you guys then around the sites. I better go. You're gonna hear my children here soon. Take care. Bye.
well, Q&A time can be for any kind of queue. So if there's other stuff that folks are wanting to raise, please go ahead. Or I mean, A can also be announcements. If there's anything else that anyone needs to kind of share out in this venue, please do. Is there anyone still on the call who can speak to installing with Ubuntu?
Yeah, I believe that we at CMU are using Ubuntu at the ILDC for deployment. I don't really remember when we were setting it up if we had any particular issues with that. We did have a lot of issues with using the Ansible playbook, which kind of forced us to switch over to using the Docker, which was a kind of a big pain to just get accustomed to change our formatting or whatever to start using that.
Is there a specific question you had, Rebel?
Not specific question. I just wanted to know if there might be somebody out there we might be able to reach out to. That's what we're trying to use to install as well. And we're also running into a lot of problems with the Ansible playbook and have been looking at Docker, and Docker install is complicated, or more complicated than someone who is like fresh out the door learning Docker, which would be, so anyway, we're just trying to see how to go forward. And it sounds like Docker may be the way, and that's what we had been hearing. And so we're just wondering if anybody has been successful any other way, or if there's some tricks out there we might be able to help get.
Yeah, when we switched over to started to use the Docker stuff, I felt that it wasn't terribly well documented. We actually had to have like sit down. We used one of these other open meetings for the developers to have a like full-on walkthrough on how to get the what do we use, the make local from demo repository working. From there, we were able to build our own code base out. Like once we got that working, there's a recording of it somewhere, and I can send it over to you once I find it. It was a while ago, but that's what we use to base, to learn about how this is supposed to actually be working, and go forward from there. But I'll look for that and I'll send it over.
There's also the Slack channels. You can always throw something like if you have a specific question, or you just want somebody to walk you through it, depending on if people have the available time. ISLE channel and the support channel are probably the two you're looking for, and those channels are really active. So. Yeah.
So my understanding, like the Ubuntu would just be the server that you're installing. You could install Docker, or you can install through Ansible on an Ubuntu server, right?
Yeah. It's just two different methods of running a server. Ansible is a set of scripts that you just point to a server, and whether it be a virtual machine or a real machine, and it'll build from there. Or the Docker, it just needs Docker, and then it tells Docker what servers to start and download, and how to manipulate them. So it's just two ways of approaching the same end goal. But with that said, there are, because one's ran inside of Docker, it now has Docker as an infrastructure. So it is quite a bit different if you're not used to Docker. So bit of a learning curve.
Thanks, Dan. I do have one other question. So even though they're two different deployments, are they grabbing the different microservices from the same place? Like they being like Ansible or Docker?
in theory, you should have the same code at whether you build from Ansible or Docker. I say that in theory because I shouldn't say never. I haven't recently tested the Ansible playbook, but they both install Drupal into a server. They both grab all the same modules into that Drupal server. They grab the same database and import it in. So everything in theory should be the same. Whether or not that's in practice, I haven't compared the two, but I believe they are.
Wait, so they're grabbing the same like Alpaca, like all those different services. Like,
Yeah,
I
I mean,
mean, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there's situations that code has to be specific to the infrastructure. So like setting networking parameters within Docker is very specific to Docker. So that code would be different, but the modules and all of the things that make it Islandora should be identical. So if I looked at the code base of Drupal in either one of those builds, they should be exactly the same.
Okay, okay. So it's just like, is it pulling from like the same GitHub repo? And then I know for Docker, it's like layering, right? It's like layering it on to whatever so like if it's a MySQL or whatever the base box is, and then on top of that. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we had like an install profile, and that install profile tells Drupal what to do. And Alexander, I think Alexander was the one that did it, that just got Ansible playbook running that. So now the two should pretty much be aligned. If not, then there might be like another pull request left to get it to where they're both loading the exact same install profile as a default. But yeah.
I mean, I've pulled the playbook recently and ISLE, and they do both look the same as far as, you know, when you go to localhost or Islandora Traffic Me, like for the Born Digital install profile. It's just a few weirdnesses with the.
It gets kind of weird when you're talking about routing, because like the way Docker does routing, and you're using traffic to handle some of that. So it doesn't always, not all the same functionality might be in both places. So I, again, haven't tested Ansible to see if you access some of these other underlining like technology. So like this is a bad example because I know of it, and it's an easy one to reference, and I know that the two are identical, but IIIF getting to the admin page is really simple with Drupal, you know, with Docker, and you just, you know, punch in the URL. I don't know how it's built. So even though the two applications are separate, so IIIF and Drupal are completely separate, how it's built might be different slightly. So it's stuff like that that I would be looking for. I wouldn't be looking at the Drupal core code. I would be looking at how is so like Docker has Watchtower. I don't think Watchtower is an Ansible because it's not a Docker container. So that gives you extra functionality to monitor your server. But I don't know if there's a trade-off. I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambling on this, but
No, this is
thinking
great.
while I'm talking.
This is great. Thank you, Don.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I do have like a question, and I'm seeing some of the stuff through the Slack. Is Carafe, or I might be saying that wrong, Carafe something, is that going away and it's just going to be Alpaca now, I think?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
So as of version 2, Jared did some great work to make it so that you can run just Alpaca. And we actually were running into issues with getting our Carafe to recognize some things. And Jared said, well, why don't you try 2.0 of Alpaca? And our testing has shown it's worked great. It's been a lot simpler to set up and to get running. So far, I'm enjoying using it as opposed to all of the hoops I had jumped through to get Carafe working.
And to my understanding, like the push for that was to use a jar instead of the, what is it, OSIG or something? I forget, or OSGI or something.
I think that is, it's still using OSGI.
Okay.
It's just that it's built into Alpaca now. And Jared would speak to this better than I can. But the point is that you don't need to use Carafe to load all the classes. It just can run it on itself.
Okay.
So yeah, the setup was super simple for us. We just took VL packet distribution, adjusted some of the settings in the properties file, and started it up for testing, and that it just worked. And the only thing that was really manual that we had to do for setting it up for production was setting up the systemd configuration file so that when our server starts up or reboots, it'll start it back up again on its own. And yeah, it's been nice.
Yeah, I kind of asked that, like I just saw a thing posted on Slack that somebody was having a problem with like the JSON LD, and I got like a weird error.
Yeah.
But when I searched like the Islandora DevOps, like that same error came up with Playbook. So that's why I would kind of ask if they using the same like code base for those, like perhaps, because like that the guy that was asking the question like is using I think make the demo for ISLE.
Yeah, I don't know that either of the deployments use that Alpaca 2.0 yet. Like we have a local install setup to where I've manually installed nearly everything on our servers. So it was fairly simple for me to go into the server that was hosting our Carafe and get rid of it and put Alpaca in its place. I cannot speak to doing that with a Playbook build or ISLE.
Oh, you know where you would be able to like check on that at all? Like,
So I don't know.
oh, sorry, you just say that.
In
Sorry about
theory,
that.
there would be a container that you would log into and work with that, but I am not the person to ask for ISLE. Like for a Playbook, you would go into the machine where the Playbook installed it, and you could do it manually after the fact. But ISLE is another beast that I am not privy to its mysteries yet.
I would think that would have to go into build kit, right? Eventually,
Yes, as far as I understand it.
and pull an image, unless you did like maybe a custom one and put it. But then you'd have to build like a whole. Yeah, that just seems easier to just grab it when the image is made. The whole point of it, right? Well, thank you guys for the information. I'm sorry to take up so much time.
That's what the
Someone
time is
needed to.
for. That's what the time is for.
It's a lot easier to do it for me, at least in this place where you can just verbally say your stuff.
Well, that was the kind of the point of it, of the open meeting, was supposed to be able to kind of like you jump in Slack and ask a question randomly. Initially, when proposed, the idea of an open meeting allowed for that conversation to be more open, and the expectation is like, no, we're here to ask questions and anybody can jump in, kind of thing. So right on.
I mean, I think it's great to have all these options and a lot of really, talented, creative folks like, putting the work in. It's a nice community. despite pointing out like sometimes being like, oh, something doesn't work. I will say I did retest, or I did check that video out for the Windows I'll install. I'll have to try it again. As far as I can tell, my setup is the same as that video. I didn't pull a demo, I pulled local. So I'll pull another code base and run like a Docker prune, right?
Yeah.
Get rid of stuff and then see if I can run it. And if I get that same error, do I just like post it up on the issues?
Yeah.
Or do you want me to link back to the other one too, or?
If you think it's relevant, yeah, go for it.
So,
yeah.
As a point of reference, during the break, I went and tried to run it, and make local brought up a apparently working site. The challenge was when I shut it down, turning it back on through all sorts of errors.
Oh.
So like I did Docker Compose down, and then I
Okay.
tried to go back up, and it was like, no, you can't do that. No.
How did you do up?
So I think I did Docker Compose up -D.
Mhm.
And
If you-
it complained. I tried to do make up after that, and it
Yeah.
was still complaining at me. So I've just done a lot of cleaning out of the VM and restarting Docker and resetting it to defaults because it was throwing all sorts of weird stuff. And it now appears to be working after trying to reset everything. But I will try again doing make down and make up next.
Did you
Yeah,
did you do a make local at first?
I accidentally muted. Yes, I did a make local.
Okay. Huh.
Make local seemed to work on Alpha 11.
Yeah, maybe I'll try it again. Maybe I just ran into something weird at that time that I did it. So that was back in October, but it's always good to test again.
There's known issues with just running Docker Compose down. Why they are caused, I have no clue. But when I was at Born Digital, we ran into it a lot. So I pushed it up into the community IL build, our fix. But the only thing that seemed to work for me is always remove orphans, and you have to run the update settings PHP script to reset everything that it resets to get it to build up right. So I just added it part of the makeup command.
So I'm doing a new make local right now, and I'll try it with make down and make up and see what happens.
Make
sorry,
local
go ahead.
does have I was just going to say make local does have a current flaw in it. So check out pull request 213, so the latest one, and it fixes make local when it builds. There's a fly system issue, and config sync isn't even created, so it doesn't have the right permissions either. I mean, that's trivial. I mean, it won't affect anything unless you try to config export, but there's a problem with the views that I have no clue why it doesn't affect demo, but it does absolutely affect local. But I wrote a patch to fix it in just local. So it literally just goes through the entire list of available views, disables them, and re-enables them.
Is there something with? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, can you link the PR really quick because I'm not seeing it right immediately.
Is there a thing like? Because I know sometimes when it's doing an install, like it might install stuff out of order. that's in the Drupal list? Like, is that a possibility to cause?
It is.
Okay,
It's either, I'm thinking it's either that or something else was installed or taken away that was like a field that was available in a view or some type of configuration storage mismatch. And by disabling it and then re-enabling it, it drops it. But it's, I'm
Oh.
guessing.
but then you said like, then it works and there's not an error with it?
Yep.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it was just chance that I came across the fix because I was going through and like trying to narrow down which view was causing the problem. And then once I disabled the view and re-enabled it to try to look at the error a little bit closer, it disappeared. And so found the solution by, just chance, but the actual root cause, I'm not sure about.
I think we're at time. I'm not sure. Isabella, are you still around?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna hit stop recording because I forgot to do that after the panel.